The video pulls viewers straight into one of the most talked about moments in pop culture history, but this time it's framed in a completely different light. Instead of showing Kanye West as just someone who interrupted Taylor Swift out of impulse, the narration slows things down and almost replays the moment through a new lens. Kanye steps onto the stage, takes the mic, and delivers the line everyone remembers. But rather than stopping there, the focus shifts to what that moment might have actually meant beneath the surface. The narrator starts questioning whether this was truly chaos or something more calculated. Viewers are guided to think about how the entire room reacted, how the attention instantly shifted, and how Beyoncé became the center of the conversation without even asking for it. The idea begins to form that maybe this wasn't just about disrespect, but possibly about redirecting attention in a way most people didn't catch at the time. As the narration builds, it plants a subtle but powerful thought. What if this moment wasn't random at all? What if it was the first visible sign of a deeper pattern hiding in plain sight, something people dismissed too quickly back then, but are now starting to question years later? The video then shifts into a pattern that feels impossible to ignore once it's pointed out. The narrator begins stacking moments one after another, showing artists standing on massive stages, holding awards, clearly emotional, and then almost instinctively bringing up Beyoncé's name. It doesn't feel like a coincidence anymore as the examples build. The tone here becomes more observant, almost investigative, as the narration highlights how these moments don't always connect directly to Beyoncé herself. Some of these artists are celebrating personal milestones, career-defining wins, or completely unrelated achievements, yet her name still enters the conversation in a powerful way. The emotional weight behind these shout-outs stands out the most, voices shaking, tears forming, words filled with admiration that feels deeper than standard industry respect. The narrator doesn't accuse or confirm anything, but instead leans into the question that naturally forms in the viewer's mind. Why does this keep happening? Why does it feel almost expected? As more examples stack up, the audience begins to feel like they're witnessing a pattern rather than isolated moments, and that realization becomes the hook that keeps them watching, waiting to see where it leads next. At this point, the narration starts widening the lens, moving beyond individual moments into the bigger structure of the music industry itself. The tone becomes more analytical, breaking down how recognition and respect usually work in this space. Typically, artists credit mentors, producers, or direct influences, people who clearly played a role in their journey. But here, the video points out something that feels different. The narrator carefully explains how Beyoncé seems to exist in a position that doesn't quite follow those usual rules. It's not just admiration, it feels elevated, almost like she occupies a space above the typical hierarchy. The narration doesn't rush this idea. Instead, it lets it unfold gradually, encouraging viewers to sit with the discomfort of that observation. Words like influence and power are used, but always with a sense of curiosity rather than certainty. The key here is the repetition. The narrator emphasizes how this behavior shows up again and again across different artists, different events, and different moments in time. And as that repetition sinks in, the audience starts to question whether this is simply respect taken to another level, or if there's something else shaping these interactions behind the scenes. The narration then transitions into a more mysterious angle, focusing on Beyoncé's well-known alter ego, Sasha Fierce. Instead of presenting it as just a creative choice, the video leans into how Beyoncé herself once described it, as something that takes over when she performs. That specific wording becomes the centerpiece of this section, as the narrator carefully explores how different people interpret it. On one side, it's framed as a common artistic technique, something performers use to step into a more confident version of themselves. But on the other side, the narration introduces the idea that some viewers hear that description differently, especially when combined with the intensity of her performances and the precision behind every detail. The tone becomes slightly more atmospheric here, encouraging curiosity without making direct claims. The narration paints a picture of the energy surrounding her shows, the preparation, the transformation, the shift that happens when she steps on stage. And instead of concluding anything, it leaves the viewer in that space of uncertainty, wondering where the line actually is between performance and something deeper.
That unanswered question quietly builds tension as the video moves forward.
The video then shifts into one of its most serious segments, bringing up the story of a former drummer who once worked closely with Beyoncé. The narration becomes more careful and measured here, clearly stating that claims were made, but also acknowledging that nothing was proven and the case didn't move forward legally. Instead of focusing on the details themselves, the narrator focuses on the impact of the situation. The idea of someone stepping forward with such strong claims is presented as a risk, not just professionally, but personally. The audience is guided to think about what it means to make allegations at that level, especially against someone with massive influence. The narration avoids conclusions, instead circling around the central question: why would someone take that kind of risk? At the same time, it highlights what happened afterward, subtly pointing out the challenges that followed. This section is less about proving anything and more about adding another layer to the overall narrative. It reinforces the sense that there are stories connected to this topic that never fully disappear, even when they aren't confirmed. As the video continues, the focus expands again, this time pulling attention toward the broader network surrounding Beyoncé. The narration introduces other powerful names, not as direct accusations, but as part of a recurring pattern people have noticed. The tone becomes more observational, pointing out how certain figures seem to exist within the same circles, appearing in similar conversations over time. The idea of influence grows larger here, shifting from an individual level to something more systemic. The narrator describes these connections as part of a wider structure within the industry, where relationships, access, and power all intersect. There's no attempt to define exactly what that means, but the repetition of these names creates a sense of familiarity that feels hard to ignore. As the audience listens, they begin to see the bigger picture forming, not just one person, but an entire environment where influence might operate differently than it appears on the surface. This section builds tension by suggesting that understanding the full story requires looking beyond any single individual. The final section introduces a contrasting figure in Erykah Badu, whose openness about spirituality sets her apart. The narration highlights how she embraces ideas of energy, transformation, and deeper awareness without hesitation, making her image feel more transparent compared to the mystery surrounding Beyoncé. This contrast becomes the key focus, as the narrator explains how the public reacts differently to something that is openly expressed versus something that is more subtle. The audience is encouraged to think about how perception shapes interpretation, how the same themes can be viewed as artistic, spiritual, or something else entirely, depending on how they are presented. As this section unfolds, it ties back to the earlier questions, connecting the dots without forcing conclusions. The narration leaves viewers with a sense that they've been shown multiple pieces of a much larger puzzle, but not the full picture. And as it closes, it brings everything back to the central idea. Not proof, but patterns. Not answers, but questions that keep resurfacing no matter how much time passes.